Hey everyone, welcome to Fluid Intelligence Podcast. Today I'm your host, Shashank. I have about 18 years in data and analytics. And today with me, we have John. John has about 20 years experience in marketing in general, customer experience, and loyalty analytics. In his latest stint, he's playing the role of Vice President Customer Loyalty at Rite Aid. And the topic for today is very interesting for many persona alike. Today we'll be discussing how, when we have a lot of data and analytics available at multiple levels in the organization, how effective are we in utilizing this data and analytics for effective decision making? John, welcome to the podcast. Excited to have you here. So if you will, while we have so much of data and analytics available at all levels, what do you think is the challenge in accessing or utilizing these data for good decision making?
I think there's a couple of things. And the first is having companies understand that data isn't equal to insights. You have to do something with it. And that's why I think sometimes people don't value analytics as much, because they don't understand that data just collectively aren't necessarily telling you, separating noise from signal. So it takes people with a certain set of skills to take that data and to do something with it, to say, here, this might be an opportunity. Um, I think I've seen a lot of leaders and mid-level managers as well that will look at a weekly report and just glance at it and say, well, I know what's going on. And they tell themselves a story and they think that they're making a data-driven decision. And I think, Shashank, when you and I talk about data-driven decision, I think we're thinking something a little bit more sophisticated, like maybe something that was tested, and you've got a test and control, and you go back and you look at the results, and you've isolated one thing, and you say this looks consistent with the hypothesis or not. Big difference between those two. So I think that's one. I think people have a misunderstanding that just because something is a number doesn't make it an insight. You've got to do something with it, or filter it, or judge it in a particular way that's consistent. I think the second thing, though, which is probably for me one of the most interesting things, but when you start asking for solutions, this is the tougher area. And that's, I think, just we as human beings aren't as good at math and logic and decision making as we think. And we're very good at very rapid pattern recognition. And that, when we were earlier in our evolution and running from an animal or deciding to eat the red berries or the blueberries, we couldn't really get into nuances of things about, well, is that data that I have consistent, and is it, can I predict the future with that? It's more, there's a bear chasing me, I need to get out of the way, and I'll figure out the physics of that later. So our brains are perfectly suited for very rapid cognition. I believe when we're stopping and making a decision based on data, it does require us to use a different part of our brain and to slow down and consider and critique the information that's coming into us. And I don't think that's fun for a lot of people. I come from a marketing background. I consider myself a marketing executive primarily, and I like to say nobody got into marketing because they like discipline and rigor. We get in it because we like, coming up with a slogan or a headline real quick and having all of our peers like it, and then it makes it on television. So I think that part of it is understanding that data needs something added to make it information. And then also there's stuff that's just in our humanity and the way that we consume information coming at us that make us just not immediately qualified to make data-driven decisions. I think you have to stop and create that discipline.
Got it, John. So, John, I hear what you're saying. Essentially, you're saying now with availability of data and analytics, there is a need for us to change the way we utilize the data and analytics for decision making, uh, and there seems to be the challenge in our ability and speed to adapt ourselves to a new framework. I hear you, John. If you can you help quantify the cost of not making decisions based on data?
It's hard to say good or bad because, of course, to really get a precision around that answer, you'd need analytics themselves. So, but I think that there are a lot of decisions that need to be made in a business where analytics can help inform. And if you believe that a more informed decision is just going to put the odds in your favor, maybe put your thumb on the scale to lean towards um, more of them being effective, more of your actions being effective, I think it can make a difference. So the inverse of that would be to say that you've got a business that's making fewer effective decisions than it could. And I think you see that in aggregate when you look at companies that have done it well, and there's very few, but companies that have really created a data-driven culture, um, I think that they will outperform other companies, especially companies that are running blind. There's fewer and fewer of them today, but there are some companies that just don't have any customer data. You see, um, I'll use a retail example. You could have a regional player that's pretty big and they've got great customer service and they've got incredible variety on their shelves, and everyone says, I love the variety, but they're not making as much profit as they can because some of those items on their shelves are going bad, or they're just taking shelf space and they're not optimized, but they don't have a loyalty program and therefore don't have customer specific data. So that they're not as profitable as they could be in that respect, because they have to accept a lower level of information. So I think it's things like that, and I think most companies, even the ones that are using data and analytics, can get better, because I think most people in my position, and probably you, Shashank, would admit that even companies that are making data-driven decisions, you still have a lot of instances where there's confusion or a low confidence in an answer, or um, often there are some leaders that are just looking for confirmation of their hypothesis, and they're data fitting or selecting which analyses they will listen to, and that is all counterproductive.
Awesome, John. John, you spoke about retailers. Can you probably give one or two examples of those retailers? Maybe allude to the retailers without actually mentioning their names. That'd be great.
So I think I could say that the number one supermarket retailer in the United Kingdom um, is very known for having a relationship um, with an analytics firm and launching a loyalty program. Honestly, the first, I think they're coming up on their 30th anniversary. It was in the early 90s. They launched a loyalty program, and they were the number two grocer in the UK forever, and they became the number one grocer. Um, from being inside and talking to a lot of leaders there, and mid-level managers, um, it really feels like it's part of their culture. People are very proud. Excuse me, when they're very proud when they're trying to make a decision, um, even an operational decision. They stop and think, is there a way we can test this? Can I pull an analyst in to look at the data? Is there a data driven solution to this that can help me optimize faster? And they really do it. I don't know how many analysts they employ at that company, but it has to be a lot, because it feels like it's the type of culture where anytime somebody is trying to make something better, they pull somebody in who majored in mathematics. And not everyone could do that. Not everyone has the resources, but I think a company that made that commitment saw a lot of results from that, and then they keep doubling down on that, and they really seem to have that in the culture.
I think I know the retailer that you're referring to, John. John, from just picking up on what you said, here is a scenario. We have leaders coming in at various levels. All of them have the right motivation to use data to be effective in their decision making. And why not? They also are mandated with making good decisions soon, and we want to see the needle moving. And the systems used to collect data, track data, report data may not be set up in the most precise way, may not be set up effectively. And so, in such situations, leaders are but forced to rely on their gut instinct, rely on tribal knowledge, organizational wisdom, and to that extent, not rely on data for their decision, right? How do you propose we proceed from here?
So I think there are two things in that question that could be taken separately. There's the incentives and the speed, and take zooming out a little bit from speed. I think there's a general thing of just the are you feeling more powerful or less powerful in your decision making ability? I'll take that one first. I think that there a lot of people feel like getting more data and more analytical insights can devalue them. I don't hear people saying that, but their reactions are consistent with that. That perhaps I've built this idea that my value is my experience means I can look at something and tell you what's going on, and my gut will help me get here. And that makes you an incredibly valuable individual if true. Of course, if you would determine if that is true, you would use data and analytics to test that hypothesis. But so I think one of the ways that you combat that is empowering more people, having people understand that ultimately having standards of measurement, standards of testing is going to make you make more efficacious decisions, and it'll make everyone do that. But maybe occasionally will not show what you want, but equally you'll have other things that will stop happening and other things you can learn from as well. So overall, everyone gets more powerful. I think the speed specifically is maybe not in every instance, but I think in many instances, the idea that analysis slows things down in the short term may be true. I believe in the long term, it's absolutely false, because I see more time wasted by people having unclear results and debating a decision longer than they would have if they did a more robust test where in the end you could look at things from multiple angles. So what I mean by that is sometimes tests are done in just a couple of stores or one or two stores, and when you're doing a store test, or with no control group, or something like that, and people will say, well, it'll directionally tell us what to do. Often they're debating afterwards the direction that it's signaling, and even at the executive level, you can find that everyone believes what they see in that test is what their going in assumption was. So you're left exactly in the same spot you were before the test. I think a robust discussion about an experiment, what it can tell you, what it can't tell you, what future things you would test if it's unclear, and an agreement to critically look at the results. If you do that ahead of time, I think that can actually ultimately, it'll make your test probably longer, your analysis a little bit longer, but ultimately I think the decision making can go faster. That's in my experience. It just feels slower.
John, when you were explaining about the retailer in UK, what I picked up from what you said is you observed a culture where decision makers across the organization were comfortable setting up the experiments. What I'm also picking up from what you did not say was that culture enabled these decision makers to communicate failure to the rest of the organization as well comfortably, right? What I'm picking up is the culture then should allow for failures to be communicated without fear or bias. And the organization should have some depth to accommodate for these failures. And of course, we would need a system to document all the experiments that we did so that we learn from our failures going forward and the organizational knowledge gets enriched.
I agree.
John, we don't see many organizations like that, right? We don't see many organizations who are willing to pay the immediate cost for a long time positive outcome in the future. And also, maybe rightfully so, because there's potential for some amount of slack to get hidden away in this change, in this chaos of change. So the question to you is, how feasible do you think it's for organizations to really embark on this, if I may, transformational journey?
I think if it was easy to do and obvious what to do to get there, many more companies would be there, because you said you don't know many examples that have a culture that I described. I bet you can name many more that say they have that commitment. And I think the word culture is the appropriate one. And I think the answer is in that word. You don't change a corporate culture overnight. And I think too many times making better decisions or data transformation or whatever you want to call that project that it would be becomes a one project for 1 year. It gets funded, or there's a PowerPoint deck and there's a big kickoff meeting. And in the end, everyone goes back to doing what they would have done. And you know, and you talk about incentives. I think you've got project managers that are incented to check boxes, and then, you know, you did the activities. Everyone was trained.
Yep.
In this Power BI or what have you, and then we did the job. And nobody goes back and checks and sees what the adoption was. Nobody goes back to check and see if the adoption correlates with more testing or better decisions or anything. So I think it's an acknowledgement that it's a change management issue. It requires commitment from the top, and it requires a sustained effort at the scale to change, to create a company culture. I should say create a company culture, because it's not like you're changing. It's not like anyone makes a decision to have a culture of not making good decisions. It's it's the absence of a culture that sees that as a value. And I think part of it is people believe that they come in, they take a job, and again, their value isn't individuals because they know how to make decisions. It's like a function of them being intelligent or something. And I think people don't realize that we can all get better at that. And especially if you talk about complex situations or the types of problems that leaders need to be solving in modern retail specifically, they require something more than just you bringing your experience and your whole self to the table. They require some insights that may not be obvious. And that requires data-driven insights, I believe.
So, John, then do you think there are any segments or any industries, verticals, any type of companies that you think are most suitable, which seem to lend itself to have a better setup, a better baseline for this data-driven decision culture compared to others? So what I mean is, do you see a B2C a little better setup than a B2B? Do you see a company of a certain scale to be better set up than a startup? Do you see a e-com centric company better than brick and mortar. Just your thoughts on if there are any inherent pockets which seem to be set up better for data-driven decision making.
I think there's combinations of factors that make it easier to have that culture, or make it that it can organically be a better baseline to start from. So first, I think in order to have a real data-driven culture at the level that we're discussing, I think you need scale. And that's not scale of sales necessarily, but scale of a number of customers and a variety of activity and engagement levels. So data to be able to do testing and analytics at a level where it's going to give you back something. So if you are a B2B company that sells a cloud services that can only be used by the top 100 companies in the world, and every year you try to get 2 or 3 more, your marketing efforts, it's very hard to do attribution and see the results of all of the effort you do. You're still going to do a lot of the activities like branding. You're going to do a lot of direct marketing. You might even do social and things like that. But you're starting to measure smaller things and playing small ball because you have to. And getting back something of statistical significance is going to be very rare. So what that means is you could try to raise the bar at the level that we're talking about, but then maybe nothing you do meets that bar. And yet you need to do that activity. So I think that B2B companies that are selling to big enterprises, but a small number of them, it's harder for them. I think another element of a company that makes something easier or harder is whether or not they just naturally have some customer data. So I mentioned loyalty programs. That's how traditional brick and mortar retailers get their customer specific data. But if you are a pure play e-com company, the data is just organically happening as you're interacting. I think some pure play e-com companies lack, I shouldn't say lack, they have different types of data. They might sell one thing online or 2 or 3, and their data is limited, or they're looking at the online activity and they're not looking at anything else. So they can have their own issues, but still, I think they're ahead of the game because they can look at individuals and not just look at overall activity in aggregate and transactions. I think traditional brick and mortar folks, even those that have e-com and a loyalty program, there's still a lot of, I would say, systems and operational approaches that look at transactions. And I like to say in meetings, no one else likes that I say this in meetings, by the way, but I like to remind people all the time that transactions aren't people. So if you had 1 million transactions last week, that could be 1 million people.
Excellent, John. I couldn't have worded it better. Absolutely. 1 million transactions don't mean 1 million households or the same million people making the transaction. Absolutely. We did speak about measurements, so I want to double click on measurements. Let's take a tactical example of a retailer who has the intent of setting up the systems to make better data-driven decisions. In this example, one, the leadership has to counter the cost of setting up the right systems to collect and record the information, and then set up few more systems, invest in few more technology to make sense of this data and convert it into actionable information. And 3, also deal with the nuanced layer of legality around what can be collected, what can be stored, what can be processed, and what can be used for decision making after all the processing. So we have known and high costs around these 3 metrics, which is cost, technology, and legality. And on the other side, we have the ROI, which is unknown. So isn't our decision-making ability to that extent curbed or limited by at least these 3 factors?
The other thing is, even if you knew that that was 1 million people and every week it's only 1 million people, is it the same million every week? Do you have customers that are lapsing and coming back? Are all the customers coming back every 2 or 3 weeks? Or are most customers coming back every week? That matters. It matters how you market to them. It matters how you judge your services and how you would test and learn from that. So I think retailers tend to look at transactions, even those that have customer data, and that's one of the biggest paradigm shifts that they have to get to. But putting all of that together, I think a retailer, especially fast-moving goods, a variety of goods with customers at different engagement levels at scale, that is also an omni-channel retailer. And throw on top of it, the best part is if you've got a loyalty program that permeates everything and you're truly omni-channel, that gives you the most visibility and the most data. But if you, and I've worked for a few companies that are like this, if you go inside even those companies, I bet you will find pockets of people that are making decisions on units and transactions that could be made better looking at customers. So even those companies aren't necessarily all the way there yet.
Oh, this is optimistic, John. So essentially what you're saying is, even before we get to that point where we have to worry about where technology is not yet ready to collect the information that we want, or about what legally is allowed or not allowed, there is so many steps, or there's so much space before that where we can use data and analytics effectively for better decisions.
I would say it this way. It's very rare that you see somebody reaching the full potential of the customer data that they have to grow their company. I have sometimes said that I feel like I could go into 8 out of 10 of the retailers in this country, know nothing about their loyalty program, and make them more money. Because it's human nature that people, I think, are going past and trying to be clever and making things complicated. And again, you see that there's something being missed, either scale or efficacy, by focusing on the right things. And I think it's human nature to do it that way. There's also, I think we never went back to one of the points we made about incentives. I think people are very incented to make a business case work, to justify part of their infrastructure, to attract more vendor funding. We get these goals sometimes as leaders that seem like they make logical sense to make us more effective, but when they become goals in of themselves, they can make you miss the mark on the bigger goals. So I think how people are incentive can affect that as well. But I think there's a lot of commonality in retail, certainly, where our incentives and what is attractive to us personally to discover on our own leads us astray very often from whatever the optimal path is. And that's why I think, you can go into most retailers and the data that they have, there's still way more potential there than they realize.
About incentives that we touched upon, I have a lot of thoughts and questions. I think I will park my questions and thoughts for till we get off the recording, and I'll ask them to you offline. It may be a longer conversation. However, we spoke about customer data. I want to draw your attention to customer satisfaction or customer feedback data. There have been a lot of use cases built around how we can use this customer feedback data that's directly passed back to the product company or the retailer to improve either business processes, or to improve the product itself, or improve or change value proposition and positioning. I just want to hear your thoughts on customer feedback data.
So I want to say before I start that I've used that data a lot. It's been my job in some parts to do customer satisfaction data. I I believe it's very important and needs to be done. I think when you are talking about when customers give you their answers about certain things, this is going to sound strange, but there are some things that they're not qualified to give you an answer for. And it goes back again to our human nature. People believe they know what motivates them.
Mhm.
And if you look at the literature on the subject, there's not a lot of data to support that. So
Mhm.
we continually ask people what they want, but we have data that shows what their behavior is. And if you can track attitudes and feelings, but look at behavior and understand the limits and the power of each of those, I think you would design those programs differently. Because when's the last time you asked somebody if price was important and they said no? In fact, I think you could charge me more. Everyone knows how to answer that question. When everyone wants a big variety, but they also want ease of shop. Well, what is ease of shop? That means that there's the variety of things that I'm interested in, but there's nothing else in the store, so I can get right to what I want. So there's a lot of things where people's answer isn't really of that much value. I think it's important to track those metrics, however, and to see if they're changing over time or if there's certain groups that deviate. But I think that you've got to be very careful about your decision making around that data and understand that I think it's a tough paradigm to get across to people, that because we believe we know when we're designing this, it makes sense because I know what I would answer and I know what motivates me, what changes my behavior, what I want out of a retailer. But again, the literature does not support that any of us actually know any of those things about ourselves. So we should track that data, but we should figure out its use and understand that it may not be as valuable as you think to be a direct connection to what you should change and what you shouldn't change. It's part of the conversation, but it's not the whole thing. And when you see what customers are saying and what they're doing differ, embrace that and understand that's, a beautiful thing about research and the social sciences, because that's the way the world does actually work. It doesn't have to make sense. I think most people who are looking at things like customer survey data, they will look at a score or a result and say, I know what that means. For instance, here's a perfect one. Price perception. At some level, if you're way out of range, price perception is going to correlate with behavior. I'm not going to argue that. But in the middle, little fluctuations may not matter. I haven't seen anyone prove that they do. But also, your score is kind of relative to other retailers. And I've seen retailers that are trying to not be the lowest service level think it's a problem that they're not showing up as the lowest price. Well, that's your positioning. Honestly, if you showed up as the lowest price and you're trying to be high quality and service, you've probably screwed something up, because they should perceive you as, maybe I am paying a little bit more for this. Maybe you don't want it to be too out of whack, but maybe it's not a bad thing. The other thing is, we always assume that when we see two things correlate, that the causality goes in a direction that makes sense with our worldview. But let me throw this at you. If you were to look at all of the price perception data that you've ever looked at, and someone was to ask you, is it possible that people change their behavior and their perception follows, not the other way around? If you answered that is possible, and you don't know how much that's a factor in your qualitative data, you don't know how to take the fact that people are saying your prices are getting higher or something like that. They could be changing their behavior and then saying that, not the other way around. So I find that stuff fascinating because it's not as simple as we think. I think the data is very important. I'm not sure if I answered your question or if I dodged it, but I'm comfortable.
No,
That is my answer, though.
oh no, that was perfect. It was a very nuanced answer, and thank you for that, for a complicated question that I threw at you. Uh, so, John, I wanted to next pick your brains on measurement of success, right? How do we set up a framework of measurement for measuring good decisions based on data?
I think you've gotten to someplace significant when people who are the major decision makers understand what the standards are, understand
Mhm,
how to think critically about what data is being presented to them,
mhm,
have a vocabulary that when leaders in the company are presenting to them, um, first of all, those leaders are showing you their work, but you can also critique that work or ask questions. Did this cross a statistical threshold? Have we looked at this in a different way, and things like that, talking about the experiment, talking about things at a level. So having everyone understand what the standards are. So if you've
mhm,
got somebody saying, I measured this and it showed X, and somebody else said, I did a very similar test, but it showed the opposite. One person is looking at it at a 95% confidence interval, and the other person just, looked in Excel and compared two columns and eyeballed them. Um, it's not the same standard. So
yeah,
having those standards be known and portable and discussed, I think people should be able to say, just like a peer-reviewed journal at the end, what was your data? What did it tell you? What was what standard did it cross? What did the data say about the efficacy of this? Um, and I think another thing is that that it's being used, that people understand it, but that there's an accumulation of knowledge. So when people are testing things, there's some standards about the way it's written and stored, and people have access to that. So I think one of the things that we don't do, and I've been guilty of this, I think I've only been guilty of this, I don't think I've ever done this well, is having a really digestible database of prior tests where somebody can look at it and do almost like a review of the literature before they go and create a test. And they can make that part of their final results. I looked at all the tests we did before that were close to this. Then we designed this test, we did it, here's the results. Like if people have a conversation like that and everyone understands what the terms mean and they have the same standards, I think the final part of that outcome is I think people will make decisions I'm just not going to say faster. I'm not going to say that you can prove that they're all better, but I think that they're going to make them with more confidence in not just what I'm making, but confidence that your peers are making good decisions as well. Because I think a lot of the people who fight being more data driven, they will say that they don't need the data, but I bet if you push, they will say that their peers are not making good decisions. So it's everybody else that has the problem. I think if you get people that are confident in corporately that people are making better decisions, I think that would be a great win. So to me, that's what the outcome looks like. And I think you can measure different components of that.
that's great, John. That's fantastic. Yeah, what organizations can do is we can start recording all the experiments, the setup, the conclusions, and including when the experiments failed and the reasons for failure. It could be that the experiment was not set up properly. It could be that all factors were not considered while setting up the experiment. It could be that the reading was not conclusive one way or the other, yet the decision had to be made and it was made. And so, when the culture allows for recording failures without fear of repercussion for the team members, I think that's a very healthy start to move towards data driven decision making. I couldn't agree more. Towards the end of the podcast, John, I will throw one last tough one at you. Can you help with one or two more things that we can start doing right here, right now, to move towards using data for better decisions?
I think a good first step for a lot of companies is to have a conversation that is not about a current test or an analysis that somebody's critiquing. Every time I shouldn't say every time, but I will say most often, I believe when people are talking about standards and methodologies, they're talking about something that's in front of them, and people already have brought their own biased ideas about whether or not that test worked, maybe without even looking at the results. I think people need to start getting used to talking about data and analytics as a function. And I think that those conversations need to start at the top, and get leaders not just comfortable with it, but embracing it and understanding that that could be an advantage to their company and endorsing it. I think too often they're just given a test and they're asking questions, and the questions end up invariably being just about that test, not about a more global issue. So I think starting to have those conversations is number one. And then honestly, trying to get a change management project endorsed.
Yeah.
To, the first step is admitting you have a problem or an opportunity, but the next step is taking some actions. And I think having a project leader, and having preferably the CEO or the president, depending on how your company's organized, your founder, having somebody with a lot of authority endorsing and becoming the spokesperson for the project.
It has to be top down. It has to be.
Top down. If you study change management at all, you realize that that's one of the things you need to get right. And even if you get everything right, it's still tough to change or create the corporate culture that you want. But if you don't get that first thing right, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, you're right, John. It's a people problem that we are trying to solve. It's not a technology problem. It's not a process problem. So it's definitely people, organizational behavior. So we have to start talking.
I think too often people make it a technology project instead of let's create a culture of data-driven decision making. They have a project to implement Power BI and get X number of users trained.
Yes, John, you're right. I mean, I can share one example without taking the name of the organization. I was part of it, and this data-driven decision making was one driven top down, yet it took close to 3 years for it to be fully implemented, which I thought was a slam dunk, right? And now in hindsight, I realized that I'm not surprised that it took the time that it took. Out of the 3 years, I think about 2 years was just getting people aligned to the process. Many iterative meetings after meetings, and just to get the leaders aligned to the process, to the framework, for them to be okay to be part of a committee where they share space with other leaders. That took the bulk of the time, and the technology and the process and the workflows implementation of that was just a smaller portion of the whole 3 year process. And in hindsight now, I'm not surprised that it was the way it was.
Me.
With that, thank you, John. Thank you for your time. Hope we do this more and often. I have always enjoyed having conversations with you, and this is the first time we are having this conversation on camera. I enjoyed this one thoroughly as well. Hope you did too.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Hope we all took away something meaningful from John's experience. If you found this discussion helpful, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Talk to you next time. Till then, thank you.